Welcome to All About Capital Campaigns, a podcast that provides fuel for your nonprofit's growth. Each week, hosts Andrea Kilstedt and Amy Eisenstein, co-founders of the Capital Campaign Toolkit, provide practical tips about raising more money for your nonprofit organization. The Capital Campaign Toolkit is a support system for nonprofit leaders who are running capital campaigns. At capitalcampaigntoolkit.com, you can download a step-by-step guide for your capital campaign and get many other free resources. This podcast is recorded on a live webinar every Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can join the live session and get your questions answered by signing up today at toolkittalks.com.
Let's talk for a minute about building your board. And it's an interesting question to think about how you use a capital campaign to build your board. I mean, the first question that comes to my mind on it is this: do you need a power board, a fundraising board, in order to have a capital campaign? And we often get that question. Do you need a board where the top gifts for your campaign will actually be from people on your board? And of course, it's ideal, right? Isn't that wonderful when that happens? But our experience is that in most campaigns, for most organizations, they have not built boards primarily because of the huge financial capacity of their board members. They've built boards because they want to have a board that represents to some extent all the people they serve, that represents a variety in their community and from their community, and that has people from representing all kinds of areas. So today, particularly for community organizations or for social service organizations, it's fairly rare to have a board from which you will get your top gifts. And you know what? That's okay, because we structure campaigns to accommodate that, right? With some frequency, most of the time, your board is not the organization that actually it works on and is responsible for the campaign. You use the process of building a campaign to pull together some board members, but also people who wouldn't serve on your board, who don't serve on your board, but who can help you reach into the community from a financial point of view that your board can't reach into. And it's one of the powers of capital campaigns, that you can build through campaign structures, that you can build relationships with people who have the kind of capacity and power and clout that you want for the campaign, even though they probably wouldn't be likely board members, either from your perspective or from theirs. Right, Amy?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the most remarkable things that I've learned about campaigns over the years is how the committee structure and having ad hoc committees and fluid committees, committee members that serve for a period of time and then step back a little bit, has been really an opportunity to engage people from the community and non-board members in your campaign in a way that you would never do if you just had to rely on your existing board. So really leveraging those committees and that opportunity is critical for your success.
Now, I want to share with you a really good idea about building your board. And this was an idea that someone shared with me, a bunch of years ago, it must be 10 or 15 years ago. And the story was this: I was doing a feasibility study. This is when I was doing traditional feasibility studies with an organization here in New York. And one of the people I went to interview was a very, very wealthy guy. And he knew his power, but he was very interesting. He was interested in nonprofits and how they worked. And he was not on the board of this organization, but he had a long relationship with it. So I go into his office. I remember he had this big, wonderful wooden desk in this lovely place with beautiful windows. And before we got to talking about nonprofits in general, and before the end of the meeting, he said, I think every nonprofit is totally crazy if they don't designate 15 minutes at every board meeting to invite someone in to talk to their board. They should invite in the most powerful people in their community. They should invite in people who can talk about their mission, experts. They should invite in people from the philanthropists from their community. That if they do that 15 minutes a board meeting, what they're going to do in that process is to have those people get to learn about their organization, to build a relationship with those people that can then go forward, right? Not necessarily build them as board members, but just have it as a standing practice. He said the other thing that happens when you do that is that your board meetings become more interesting. I thought, you know what a great idea that is. It just would take a little doing in board governance and somebody to say, okay, who's going to be on the committee who invites people to be presenters at our organization? 15 minutes, find out what we're doing, tell us about what you're doing, give us some lessons, tell us about things in the community you think we should know. Right? Imagine if you did that every time. Isn't it a great idea?
That is a great idea. And I think that in this age of virtual meetings, it's even easier because you can think outside your community. You can use anybody and people are available and they just need to zoom in for 15 minutes. Let me backtrack a little bit off the outside of your community. Use people that are in your community, whatever that means. If you're a national organization or across geographies, it certainly makes it easier. But you want people that are philanthropists in your community or in your sphere. So people that have the potential to be interested and engaged in your mission. So, all right, for whatever that's worth.
It's funny, that's the power of ideas. Amy, I can't remember the name of that guy, right? But I can remember his idea, right? It's such a good idea.
It is such a good idea. Excellent. All right.
So I have one more thing to say, and then let's pivot to questions. But the last thing that strikes me about this is that if you use your campaign committees to bring in people who are not on your board, right, and to build relationships with them through your campaign, it may be that those people eventually would want to serve on your board and that you would want to have them on your board. So it's not a good idea to scramble around like mad to build a power board before your campaign, but you should really be working to use your campaign to build relationships with people that might then strengthen your board after the campaign. And that I think is counterintuitive to a lot of people. So worth thinking about.
Yeah, I think you're right, Andrea. It's exactly opposite of what most people think. They think they have to build their board prior to a campaign. And certainly, wouldn't that be wonderful? Somebody came to me the other day and she said, I want to raise $1 million for my endowment or whatever, it was a big number for that organization. And we talked a little bit. And, she had been at the organization a long time, 15 years or more as the executive director. And I said, well, why haven't you built the endowment over time? And she said, for this reason I couldn't, and for that reason I can. So, it's not like magic, a campaign, all of a sudden she's going to be able to raise $1 million for her endowment. And so, her thinking was a little bit backwards. And I think that that's the same idea. You may have wanted to build a power board for the last 10 years. It doesn't just happen because you want to have a campaign. But using the campaign process and campaign strategy and, awareness building and consensus building and recruiting people to participate, your board will come out stronger because of the campaign. But it's not like, the day you decide to have a campaign, you can all of a sudden build your board into a power board. You have, if you've been trying to build up your board for the last 10 years, but a campaign is a tool and gives you an infrastructure and an opportunity to think about building your board over time in the future. So I love that.
Amy, I want to answer Jennifer's question because I suspect it's a question a lot of people have, which is if you invite a presenter in, what are the questions or topics you would ask that presenter to talk about? And here's a simple answer for that. You want to invite people in to talk about something they are experts at, right? You want to pick people because they have something interesting, an interesting perspective or something interesting to say, and if you, for example, have a monthly board meeting, right? It's one thing to say, Amy, would you come and talk to our April board meeting? It's another thing to say, Amy, every year we pick 12 leaders in our community and we invite those leaders in to talk to our board, for 15 minutes, right? About their role in the community, about, things that they are expert at. Would you be willing to be, your name is on that list. Would you be willing to be one of those experts? So if I create a context for asking her and that makes her feel great, she's going to say yes, right? If I just say, well, we were trying to fill 10 minutes of board time, she's going to say no.
And I think to the point about asking them what to talk about, right? So, there are going to be some natural things, if you're picking somebody because of their marketing expertise or because of their, whatever their qualifications and their maybe, because of their professional expertise, but also, you may think of who's somebody who's led a capital campaign at another organization. Would they come share lessons learned from their board, as a board chair or a campaign chair from another organization? You're not trying to poach them, but you're trying to learn from them. And so, would they come share those things? So, they don't have to teach you things that you already know. You want them teaching you things that come very naturally to them. If you have an attorney, an estate planning attorney in the community, come teach us about how we might think about including, encouraging donors to leave us in their wills. Those types of things. So, one thing, to zoom in for 15 minutes is fine. If you're actually inviting somebody in person, stopping by for 15 minutes might be really good for them. And they might want to get more out of it. So you may say, we offer people the opportunity to come at the beginning for snacks or to, present at the very end. And then people will stay and want to talk to you. So, would 7 p.m. or would 9 p.m. work better for you? So you want to build in networking. They might want to network with people on your board. Your board might want to network with them as well. So, and
it doesn't even have to just be community leaders. You might invite an alumni from the organization to come and talk, right? And find out what's happened to their lives and you don't have to limit it to community leaders. I suspect once you get a conversation going about who those people should be, you'll be surprised at how rich the territory is and how over time the possibilities become huge. Okay.
Endless. All right, let's turn to the questions now. Yeah. We've got some.
All right, here, Lauren, thank you for your first question. The first question that came in, Lauren, and we're gonna answer it. In this time of COVID, with no public gatherings, we're trying to be as creative as possible with the public phase of the campaign. What do you think of billboards and a postcard to every household in our service area? So I want all of you to chat in if you have interesting ideas about how you go public in this time of COVID. What are the ways in which you can get the word out that are creative and helpful? So I think, really what you're after in the public phase of it, the only reason, let me put it this way, the only reason, in my opinion, my humble opinion, to have a public phase of a campaign is because you are building awareness so that you can increase the number of people who know about you and who give to you going forward. More and more, we raise the great bulk of the money before we ever get to the public phase. And, I mean, more and more, I encourage people not to go public until they've raised 90 or even 95% of the money, right? If you raise more than that from the public phase, that's great. But what you really are focusing on, and Lauren, you're pointing to this, is an increased awareness in your organization and the good that it does. And certainly things like billboards and postcards, but be sure you don't waste your money, right? If you're going to do billboards and postcards, do them in a way that people are going to see them and notice them. This is a time actually to spend money on creative talent as you plan the public phase of your campaign. Don't do a lousy looking billboard that's on the outskirts of town that nobody's ever going to notice. That's a waste. Figure out a billboard that's going to right? That's going to get people's attention. Be creative about what it is you do for the public phase of the campaign in a way that is going to get people to call you or to, do something that's going to be a sweetener for their actually getting in touch with you or getting involved. So having people eyeballs on your billboard is one thing. Having eyeballs on your billboard that triggers them to actually do something is something quite different, and I would work to get that. Same with postcards.
Yeah, there's lots of good suggestions in the chat that I just want to acknowledge. And so Susie's recommending a digital campaign, peer-to-peer campaigns during COVID, of course. Online fundraising went through the roof. It grew faster in 2020 than any other year prior, as we should not be surprised about. So a public aspect of your campaign, of course, would include some digital fundraising. Gary's saying, I'd look at the public phase as building for the future. For future campaigns, right?
Gary, you said that so succinctly.
Right. That's right. So, Lauren, when you're asking about billboards and postcards, I would ask, what's the goal? What are you trying to achieve? If it's lots of dollars raised, it's probably not the best strategy, right? So we look at those are sort of marketing, casting a wide net, and you'll catch a few fish, but that's not a time for big fundraising, which I'm guessing but just want to make sure that it was said. Several people have talked about virtual galas. David's mentioning that. Making sure that you have a call to action, Jamie's saying. Yeah. So, okay.
So Brian has asked this question: how do you get the board members to identify relationships with foundations and corporations and use them to open doors? All right, Brian. So there are a variety of aspects to this question. First of all, in order to do that, you have to, of course, have a board that has those relationships. And some of your board members may have those relationships, but some of them may not. And you have to be careful that you don't make board members feel bad because you're asking them to do things that is not within their capacity to do. And I think we often do that with boards, right? We don't do a good job of differentiating when we're talking about a board as a whole and when we need to look at who the individuals on your board are who could help in this way. So, the most simple and straightforward thing to do is to ask board members to self-identify if they think they have relationships with area foundations or corporations and meet with them separately, right? To say, okay, let's make a list. And actually, I would probably bring in a list to that meeting. People do better if you start with a list, not just a blank sheet of paper. Say, here are the foundations and corporations on our list that we're trying to find out information, see who has connections. Let's go over this one by one at this meeting of people who have self-identified. And see, it may be that you have 2 or 3 people who know one foundation or who know one corporation. And then you can say, well, what are the next best steps with that? So to summarize, be sure that you're not asking board members to do things that they are not qualified or able to do. That's always a mistake because it makes them feel bad. And that you pull the people who can help with that and you pull them together. there is something about coming together with others, and that you work from a list. And then that will fuel them to think about other people they may know. Right. And then brainstorm.
Yes. Let me add to that, Brian. So for what Andrea said, yes, don't make the assumption that your board members know corporations and foundations. I think, it is frustrating for nonprofit staff when we make assumptions like that. Do some research in advance. You can use LinkedIn these days and Facebook to find out who your board members are connected to. So you may want to go to someone and say, hey, I see you're a first connection with so-and-so at such and such foundation. I mean, you can certainly ask them, but I do want to remind you and everybody else on the call, the Giving USA statistics every year that come out show us that corporations and foundations give about 20% of the philanthropic dollars in this country, combined, 20% combined. Individuals give close to 80% of the philanthropic dollars. We can break those statistics down even more if you want, but really the point I'm trying to make is that when you're asking the question, how do we get board members to identify relationships with foundations? I want to flip the question and ask, how do we get board members to identify people who might be interested in supporting our cause or learning more about our cause? So why restrict yourself to corporations and foundations? You can ask that question. You might get one or two who have relationships or who work at companies or foundations that do provide philanthropic support. But the vast majority of your board members are more likely to have personal networks of individuals who might be interested in supporting your cause. So let's make sure to go in that direction as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you've said, Amy. And it is also true that in many communities, there are a couple of significant foundations that give to many of the capital campaigns in those communities. And you, of course, need to be checking and seeing who on your board has relationships with those if you don't already have a significant relationship with those people. So this is a yes, of course you should be working on building relationships with individuals and foundations and occasional corporations. Right? That's really the case. Now, our anonymous attendee, Amy, has raised this question that you and I have really wrestled with, and we have not come up with a good answer for. And I wish we could. We keep wrestling with it, though. So I do want to look at this question because I think it's important for all of us to think about it. The question is this: how do you think about equity and white supremacy culture in your work in capital campaigns? How do you consider best or better practices regarding the structure of our industry in regards to capital campaigns and capacity donors? This is, and it troubles me this topic is complicated, and we do keep thinking about it and working on it, because in some way, capital campaigns are among the most capitalistic of fundraising endeavors. Right? They rely on a very few, very big gifts, which are often gifts from white people, right? Sometimes from white people whose values you may or may not believe in or agree with. And the question is, what can you do? What should you do to stop centering whiteness in this business that by its nature, by the top-heavy nature of this particular kind of fundraising, it raises, fundamental questions. We are in the most capitalistic kind of fundraising. And do I have good answers? If anyone has good answers to this, I would love to know them. I mean, I keep thinking about, and we keep working on including many more people on committees, on using capital campaigns to teach people of all kinds about fundraising, on giving people skills so that whatever your color is, wherever you come from in the society, you know how to ask people who have money for money. right? I mean, I keep thinking about it from that point of view, because it turns out to be very difficult to identify people in many communities who are people of color who have the kind of resources that we need for capital campaign fundraising. So we think about it from the other way around, that really we can help people get access to dollars by including them in our campaign structures, by teaching them, by helping them understand that anybody can go and ask someone for money. You don't need to be rich and wealthy and white in order to ask somebody for a gift, but you do need to understand how to do it well, how to do it effectively. So at the Capital Campaign Toolkit, we work to encourage our clients to do more of that, to think consciously and constructively about it. Now, yeah. You're an anonymous attendee, so I don't know who you are, but I would very much appreciate your thoughts about how to do this. We continue to be active in our own minds about being more conscious of equity and inclusion in this most capitalistic of fundraising, and we are aware of the challenges of it.
In the chats, and remember, everybody who's typing into the chat, if you're participating live, make sure that you write to panelists and attendees so everybody can see the conversation. But David's saying include diversity and inclusivity in your messaging, of course. And Jamie is adding the gift and the donor needs to align with the organization's goals and principles. And, for sure. And Karen is recommending Decolonizing Wealth as an excellent read. So
yes.
We'll have to check that out. Have you read it, Andrea?
I actually have, and I have. I think it's really quite interesting. A lot of what's been written is written largely about foundations, which is interesting. About that, which is a slightly different. It's just one corner of the world in which we operate. But I think the more we read about this, the more we are aware of it, the more we can find ways to bring inclusivity to even this kind of fundraising.
All right. So Victoria is asking about how to use campaigns to fundraise. She's fundraising for youth reader stipends. So I think that leads to the question about how to fundraise for any specific thing. What is your case for support? What are your campaign objectives? That's how I'm reading the question. And so, I think the bottom line is to start finding people who care about the thing that you're fundraising for. And so whether it's starting with your volunteers and board members or staff members or clients, but really we use this graphic image of concentric circles, right? When talking about an organization. And so the smallest circle in the middle is your organization, and that is probably your board members, your staff members, your clients. The next circle out would be your donors and volunteers, and out we go into the community. The people that are closest to the center of those circles are going to be the most interested in your cause. And that's for capital campaign fundraising and all types of fundraising. But, of course, at the Capital Campaign Toolkit, we like to think that a campaign mindset, as we touched on a little bit in a few weeks ago's blog post, but, thinking about capital campaign strategy really is the most effective way to raise money for any cause. Really thinking about, what do you need to raise money for? What are your campaign objectives? How much will that cost? And then really making a solid case for support. Why should donors care? Why should they give to you? Why should they give to your organization now? What's the urgency? What will you do? What's the impact? So what would you add, Andrea?
I think that's right.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. All right. There's so much chat going on. If you're listening on the podcast, then you might want to think about joining us on Mondays at 2 p.m. Eastern time for the live taping, so you can participate in the chat. The conversation is going by faster than I can read it.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you're here live and you missed a Monday, you can always join us on the podcast called All About Capital Campaigns. So if you ever miss a Monday, you can join us a few days afterwards on your favorite podcasting app. Okay, what's the next question here?
Well, I just want to pick up a couple of things from the chat, Amy, just so that the people who listen on podcasts sort of know what that chat is about, because this issue of inclusivity is so important, I think. So somebody has said add inclusivity and diversity to all messaging, and somebody has suggested that you make sure that you are recruiting widely as you pull people into campaign committees. Let's see, what's another one?
Sharon's writing, it is important never to assume that you know anyone's ability to give based on culture, address. This will help with inclusivity, not making assumptions about people. So thank you, Sharon, for that comment.
Yeah, so it's such a great topic to keep going. I thank you for raising it, and I think we need to keep talking about it. So we have an interesting situation here. Pause. Oh, I'm sorry, Amy. You read that anonymous thing. My doorbell is ringing, and I can't get it.
Oops. Okay. All right. Next question. My organization has a very small and aging board. They want to sunset the organization after the capital campaign, but I would rather they think of succession and use the campaign as an opportunity to get to know supporters and build a new board to keep the organization going. Does this make sense? So I can't. Oh, okay, Andrea, you're still muted. So go ahead. You just mouthed no. What were you about to say? No, it doesn't. Okay, why are you still muted? Hold on. Let me try and figure out how.
I got it.
There you are. There you are.
Sorry. So here's why it doesn't make sense. First of all, it's troubling to imagine an organization saying, "Well, we're going to." Oh.
Okay. Go get it. Yeah, so I don't know what Andrea was going to say, but I don't understand an organization that's doing a campaign and then going into a sunset to me, or to close down. So I don't understand why anybody would give to you if you're sunsetting. So Sharon's saying don't sunset, repurpose. Diana's saying they should do an open call for nominations, right? So, maybe we need more information about this. I can't imagine, like I said, Andrea's back. I can't imagine any organization doing a campaign or any donors giving to you. You have to be honest with them if you're about to phase out. It makes no sense. What were you going to say, Andrea?
That's that. Exactly. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. I mean, if the organization, the board is getting old and they're tired, that's fine. If they want to sunset, but don't raise a bunch of money first. And then, I'm sure he's not talking about taking the money and running, but still that's not the right approach. So someone needs to tell your organization that they either need to make a decision that they're going to keep going and bring on a younger board, right? And then they can raise the money, or they need to fade into the woodwork. And I'm all for that, actually. I think many organizations, it's actually an interesting subject of sunsetting an organization. And I think we need to do much more of that, honestly. I think many organizations have a natural ebb and flow, right? Organization starts with a lot of energy. Often you have a founder or founders, they build something and they get to a point where either they're getting old or they lose their energy and they haven't bothered to do the things they need to do to build a robust board and get beyond the founder. There's absolutely nothing wrong with an organization like that deciding that it's done, that it's over, right? So I just want to raise that as a possibility, as a reasonable possibility.
Yeah. So, somebody in the chat, and I can't find it now. Oh, it's Mary, is asking, is the mission still relevant? Right. And if it is, then you can keep going. But if it's, it's always interesting to think about the mission or the goal of your organization. You should be working to put yourself out of a job. You should be working to sunset. And I can only think of one or maybe 2 organizations that I'm aware of that have actually accomplished their mission and be able to either shut down or pivot completely. But wouldn't it be amazing if you solved world hunger or fully cleaned the environment? I mean, we all want to sunset out once we accomplish the mission. If the mission is still relevant, then you should keep going and recruit new board members.
Maybe you should keep going. Organizations have this difficult time in getting past their founders. I'm a real believer in founders organizations. I think they have a wonderful energy. There's nothing like a founder when they're fired up to get things done, to make things happen. It's quite magical. Relatively few founders are able to get beyond that. They're able to let go of an organization in a way that it can continue after they're gone. And if it can't, that's fine, right? Say, boy, isn't this an amazing run? Haven't we accomplished amazing things? Kudos to the founder. Now we're going away. Goodbye.
Or, as Priscilla suggests, merging might be appropriate.
Merging, or having someone else come in and think about it in quite a fresh way. So so many of the organizations, the amazing nonprofit organizations, exist when there is an energy to make the work happen. And when that energy wanes, you either have to find a way to rekindle it, or you have to say, we haven't solved the problem forever. This is a big problem. It's not going to go away anytime soon. But what we can do has come to an end. And the reason I'm sticking with this, Amy, is that I think it's a point of view you rarely hear. So I just want to make sure people know it's okay.
Yes. Is your board brave enough to vote themselves out of existence, right?
Yes. I do have a little story about this.
Pam's adding, term limits, right? To get new energy and passion on the board.
Exactly.
Your board should never age out or, get too old, because you should be turning over your board every few years. So,
yes, Amy, the same guy who told me about bringing in visitors to your board also said something else to me and that was a terrific meeting I had with him, right? Yep. The other thing he said is, I think people are crazy if they are not organizations, people who run organizations are crazy if they're not working on getting trust fund babies onto their board, right? The next generation of wealth.
Yeah.
He said there is a group of people who are young, who are in their 20s, who grew up in wealth, and their families, the older generation, would like to have the younger generation learn how to become philanthropists. And a great way to do that is to get them to serve on boards. So he said, I think people are crazy not to know who that next generation is. Look around your community, see where the next generation of wealth is, invite them to serve on your board. And because what's going to happen in some cases is that their families are going to really encourage them to do that. And their families are going to want them to succeed, right, when they get on a board. And that will have good consequences.
Good outcomes. Consequences.
Outcomes.
No, that's right. Consequences, I think, is technically correct, but it has a negative connotation.
Right. Good outcomes. So, you're exactly right. Yes. So anyway, now I'm done with my stories from that guy.
Yeah. So, but, Victoria's correctly pointing out that you have to know those people. And for small BIPOC organizations, they don't have those access or connections. And, it is a struggle to network outside of your immediate community.
Yes. But wait a minute. We can pull this conversation together, right? Yeah. Small BIPOC conversations can invite some of the region's philanthropists in to talk to them, and 15 minutes of a board meeting. We can pull these things together. Right? They're going to be happy to do that. They're going to be willing to build relationships. Those relationships can exist if you put time and thoughtful attention into building them. Right? And that's a really interesting thing to do. So again, we can't assume who's willing to help us and who's not willing to help us. And you know what?
some people who, are, I don't think it's about gatekeeper, and many, only very few people actually have gatekeepers, right? The vast majority of people in your community do not operate with gatekeepers. You don't need to only find the multi-billionaires. There are plenty of people who are vice president level and, president level business owners in your community who don't have gatekeepers. And if you drop them a handwritten note or picked up the phone or dropped off some home-baked cookies with a note, would happily read your note. And my guess is that, honestly, it goes both ways, right? So people at BIPOC organizations don't know some of these, white philanthropists, and white philanthropists may be looking for new opportunities and they don't know how to get involved or where to start. So it takes reaching out, I think, in both directions. And this idea of a board member, inviting someone to talk to your board 12 times a year or 8 times a year is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. Or, you could invite them to talk to your staff. You could invite people to talk to your clients. It doesn't just have to be at board meetings. And so really bringing people in and engaging people. It's what fundraising is all about. It's what we do with a capital campaign.
Here's another idea about gatekeepers. I think we underestimate gatekeepers. Sometimes gatekeepers are important and they are powerful. And my guess is that they seldom get invited to come and talk to a board. Mm. But wouldn't it be interesting to go to a gatekeeper from your community foundation? And it may be that, I'm thinking of a friend of mine. I have a friend who's very wealthy. She hires someone to handle her philanthropy for her. Now, would the person she hired, she sits at her desk and she goes through the proposals and she decides who's going to give the money and she does all the correspondence. Would she feel great if someone came and said, listen, we want to understand what this world looks like from your perspective. Won't you come and talk to our board? I'll bet you anything she would be tickled to do it, because the requests almost always go to her boss and not to her. Right. So I wouldn't assume that the gatekeeper won't be happy to come and talk to you and share what she's learned or he's learned over the years of working as a gatekeeper, what they see and what they don't see, what works and what doesn't work. Right. Why not invite the gatekeeper? Powerful people, those gatekeepers. Right?
I love Amy's comments here in the chat. She says, I've had luck networking after getting into a local leadership class, Leadership Austin here. Having that connection of being an alumni of the same course can get you contacts and get you into the door that you might not have otherwise. So yeah, looking for those connections, figuring out, what organizations you both belong to. A little bit of research goes a long way, I think. All right. Let's read. Go ahead.
So let's see. Yeah, Pam Montgomery points out that you can often find the next generation of wealth already involved in family foundations. I think that is often true, and it doesn't take very many asking people before you find out who is there. There was a campaign where they invited the next generation, a young woman in her 20s, of a big wealthy family to serve as a co-chair of the campaign. She didn't have a clue what she was doing, but the family was interested in having her learn. And said that. And we actually spent a lot of time working with her. She became a very capable chair during that campaign, and the family was delighted.
All right. So Marriott's asking us to define gatekeepers. So, it's an administrative assistant who manages the person's mail, email, phone calls. They take their messages, so they control who gets through to the person you're trying to reach. So, the CEO of a big corporation would have an administrative person. In the old days, I guess we called them a secretary, who would, like I said, be at the gate to figuring out oh yes, Kit's reminding me. They manage the calendar. They figure out who's getting an appointment, who's not getting an appointment, what mail gets through, what phone messages get through. All right, good.
It'd be interesting to know what it feels like to be in that position, to know what they learn about the community by watching the mail, to know what do's and don'ts they would advise, right, from that position. I promise you, if you can get them to talk to you, you're going to get an earful.
What ticks their employer off, right? Right. I'm sure, if you're in a position where you're a philanthropist in a community, you get solicitations constantly, and some you respond positively to, and some you are not interested in. And, those gatekeepers or people who work with you closely may have a good sense of, don't say that to my boss. They do not respond well to that. Or, this is the kind of thing that they would catch their attention, or that I would pass along, right? All right.
So some Coon, I don't know how to get your name proper. I spoke with you some years ago, I think, and you were building a Cambodian center somewhere in Massachusetts, if I recall correctly. And you asked the following question, which is, I'd be interested in people's thoughts about it. My board members are mostly limited English proficient and totally new to capital campaigns. Most of them are not wealthy themselves, but they're passionate about the tradition and the culture. How can I get them to help out with the capital campaign and overcome their barriers? So it's a challenging situation. Passion does win the day, but you have to be able, of course, to communicate with the people who have wealth. One thing that I would start off the answer to this with is that most organizations, when they come to us to talk about their campaigns, say to us, most of our board are not wealthy themselves. So that is not peculiar to your organization. Now, it's combined with the fact that some of your board members' English skills may not be so good, and clearly you have to work in terms of reaching out and making connections with philanthropists. You have to work with people whose English skills are good enough to do that. But I would. Go
ahead. All right. So my suggestion is that most second generation kids speak English much better than their parents do. And so having them translate the emails, draft the notes, so there are probably people close to your board members who do have better English than your board members themselves. The next generation is going to speak much better English. And so, if your board members, draft emails, communicate the message, what they wish they could say, then even a 10 or a 12, 14-year-old, would be able to translate that type of note into an email, into a note. So I think that that's one way around that. The English barrier. I mean, at first I was going to suggest hiring a translator. Looking for a volunteer translator, I think, is probably also a reasonable suggestion.
And the other thing I would say is that it is likely that most of the money that comes to your campaign is going to come from people who have a real interest and connection to the Cambodian community. Right? It's not likely to come from people who have no knowledge of the Cambodian community, right? Or the history of Cambodia with our country. And so many of the people you're going to be going to, it's not likely to be a problem. Right. The problem is thinking that people who have no connection at all to what you're trying to do are going to give you money just because you're asking for it. So that's probably where we should have started this conversation, I would think. So I hope that's helpful.
Let's drill down on that a little bit more, Andrea. I think that's actually a good way to wrap up our conversation today, is emphasizing for everybody. That's not just unique to this organization or this campaign. people who don't have a connection to your cause or mission or community are not going to be interested, or very unlikely to be interested in giving to your organization. So the very first thing that you want to be looking for when you're looking for potential donors or prospective donors or people to help are, do they have a connection? Could they have a connection, right? I mean, if you're looking to raise money for an animal shelter, people that don't have any pets, may not be good prospective donors for you, no matter how much money they have.
Great example, Amy.
Right. And so, I mean, like everybody knows somebody who has cancer, but until it's touched your family, is it going to be your number one charity? Probably not. Right. So really figuring, I think that point is really salient for everybody on the call, is that you're not looking for any philanthropist in the community. You're not looking for wealthy people. You're looking for people who have a connection and interest in your cause. And that's critical for any fundraising endeavor.
Amy, we've covered a lot of ground today. What are we talking about next week?
What are we talking about next week? I think we're talking about being in a campaign mindset, if I recall correctly. And, it's something that we've been thinking more and more about here at the Toolkit. And actually, the idea for the campaign mindset, or using that terminology, was put into our head by Derry Derringer. And I saw him on the call. He was participating in the chat. So thank you, Derry. Our hats off to you for that one. But really thinking about approaching all of your fundraising using the best of campaign strategies. So I think that's what we're going to be talking about next week.
So, and we have a couple of things at the Toolkit specifically about boards. We've wandered a little from that subject today, but we do. How would people get them, Amy? Do you know?
Yes. Excellent. Well, so we do have an ebook. I'm going to have to go dig it out, but for a guide to board members and capital campaigns, you know what, for the time being, why don't you just email us at support@Capital Campaign Toolkit, and we'll get that resource to you. We'll point you in the right direction if you're interested in our ebook on board, everything your board members need to know about capital campaigns. But even more importantly, Andrea has come up with the most effective, most amazing solicitation and board trainings, and we offer them at the Capital Campaign Toolkit. So if you want to educate your board members on thinking about what's involved in a capital campaign, or you're ready to get started, or you're ready to train your board members and your campaign committee members on solicitation training, then go right ahead and reach out to us. We would love to talk to you about those training opportunities. And of course, we're doing them all virtually now. All right. So final thing for the day, going into the chat box, support@capitalcampaigntoolkit.com. You can ask us for that board guide, support@Capital Campaign Toolkit. Hopefully I spelled it right, but it's in the chat box. And that, just ask us for the board guide to capital campaigns.
We're going to put that in again.
Did I not spell it right?
I don't think so. Wait, where am I?
Oh, I didn't. So don't copy. Tool, KIT. I totally missed. Right. So don't pick up what I said. All right, guys, it's been great. We'll put this in. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks for joining Amy and Andrea for today's All About Capital Campaigns. To learn more about them and their work together, go to capitalcampaigntoolkit.com.